Somewhere in a drawer in your parents' house or your grandparents' house, there is a small book. It's about the size of a passport. The cover is worn soft at the corners, and if you open it, you'll find columns of numbers written by hand, in ink in a bank teller's careful handwriting. Every dollar deposited. Every dollar withdrawn, a running total updated in person at a counter by a human being who knew your name. That little book was called a passbook, and for most of the last century, it was simply how a person saved money. And here's the strange thing about it. To build any savings back then, you had to physically walk into a bank, wait in a line, and hand your money to a person. And when you wanted it back, you had to do the same thing in reverse. That friction, that walk, that line, that pause was quietly one of the most powerful savings tools ever invented. And we spent 50 years engineering it completely out of existence and then wondered why nobody can save anymore. Half a century ago, an ordinary family did a dozen things with money that would look to us almost insane. They bought things they couldn't yet afford by waiting for them. They fixed the television instead of replacing it. They ran an entire household, bought a home, and raised several children on a single paycheck. And it's tempting to say, well, things were just cheaper back then, and life was simpler. Some of that is true, and we'll be honest about it. But a huge part of the difference wasn't the economy. It was the habits. It was a whole way of relating to money that we have almost entirely lost, without ever deciding to lose it. So today I'm going to walk you through 10 money habits that were completely normal for your grandparents, and would seem certifiably crazy today. Some of them we're better off without. But most of them, I'd argue, we should never have let go of, and a few of them, if you brought them back tomorrow, would quietly change your entire financial life. And stick around to the end, because I'm going to show you what happens when one ordinary modern family brings back just a handful of these old habits. The number they end up with is going to surprise you. Let's start with that little book. Number 1. They made saving difficult on purpose. We just talked about the passbook, but it went further than one little book. Money, back then, was slow. It moved at the speed of a human walking into a building. If you wanted to spend money you didn't have on hand, you had to go get it. If you wanted to move money, you wrote a check and waited days for it to clear. There was a natural delay built into almost every financial decision, and in that delay lived something we've almost entirely destroyed: the second thought. Now think about how money works for you. It has never been easier to spend. Your card is saved on a dozen websites, one tap and it's done. A thing you didn't know existed this morning can be paid for, in installments and on its way to your door, before lunch. And at no point in that process were you ever forced to stop and think. Every layer of friction we removed felt like progress, and each one made it a little bit easier to spend money you'd have kept if you'd simply had to pause. Here's the lesson you can actually steal from your grandparents. You don't have to move your money into a vault, but you can rebuild a little friction on purpose. Take the card off the websites. Unlink the one-tap payment, make yourself type the number in every single time. That tiny annoying delay is the modern version of the walk to the bank, and it will save you more than any budgeting app ever will. Number 2, they waited for things. It was called layaway. This one sounds to a modern ear almost unbelievable. Imagine you wanted a winter coat and it cost more than you had. Here's what a person did. They went to the store, chose the coat, and the store put it aside, in the back, with their name on it. And then, over the next weeks or months, they came in and paid it off a little at a time. And when it was fully paid for, and only then, they took it home. That was layaway. And I want you to notice what it actually was. It was buying something you couldn't afford, by saving up for it first, with the thing itself waiting for you at the finish line as the reward. Now look at what replaced it. We have a technology that is layaway turned exactly inside out. You get the coat today, you pay for it over the following weeks. 4 easy payments, they call it. And on the surface, it looks like the same thing, a big purchase, broken into small pieces. But it is the precise opposite, and the difference is everything. Layaway meant you waited, then you owned it, free and clear, having paid nothing extra. The modern version means you own it now and you owe. You flipped from saving to borrowing and reversed the entire direction of the money. Here's the part that should land. Layaway couldn't hurt you. The worst thing that could happen is you changed your mind and got your money back. The modern version can hurt you a great deal. Late fees, overlapping payments, a debt you're still paying on a thing that's already worn out. Your grandparents got the discipline of waiting and paid nothing for it. We get the thing immediately and pay for the privilege, sometimes for years. Number 3, they fix things. Half a century ago, when the television broke, you did not buy a television. You called the TV repairman or you took it down to his shop, and he opened up the back of it, replaced the part that had failed, and it worked again for another 10 years. There was a repairman for almost everything. Shoes went to a cobbler, small appliances went to a repair shop. Clothes were mended at home because nearly everyone could sew at least a little. When something broke, the first question, the automatic, unquestioned question, was how do we fix this? Now think about your own reflex. Something breaks, and before you've even really looked at it, you're pricing the replacement. The blender dies, you buy a blender. The phone screen cracks, you eye the upgrade. And a lot of the time, that's not even a choice, because the thing was built so it can't be opened, priced so that fixing it costs nearly as much as replacing it, and designed, quietly, to fail right about the time the new model comes out. That shift from a repair culture to a replace culture is one of the most expensive things that has ever happened to the ordinary household budget. And almost nobody notices it, because it happened one broken object at a time. You don't need to become a repairman, but the next time something breaks, pause before you replace it and ask the old question first: can this be fixed? Half the time, it can in 10 minutes with a screwdriver and a video someone made for free. And every time you do it, you keep money that would have walked straight out the door. Number 4. They ran the whole house on one income. This is the one that sounds most like a fairy tale to a modern family, and we have to be careful and honest about it, because it's also the one where the world genuinely changed underneath people's feet. Half a century ago, it was common, normal even, for one person's paycheck to cover an entire household. The mortgage, the car, food for several children, a vacation once a year, savings, all of it on a single income. Now, part of why that's harder today is not a habits problem, and I won't pretend it is. Housing costs compared to incomes have climbed enormously. Healthcare and education cost multiples of what they did. Some of the ground really did shift, and no amount of budgeting fixes a house that costs 10 times what it once did relative to a paycheck. That's real, and anyone who tells you it's purely a discipline problem is lying to you. But here's the part that is about habits, and it's uncomfortable. That single-income family also lived in a smaller house. They had one car, not 3. They had a fraction of the clothes. They ate out a handful of times a year, as a genuine event, not a Tuesday. They did not have a single subscription, because subscriptions didn't exist. Their entire baseline of what a normal life required was dramatically lower than ours. So the honest answer is, it's both. The world got more expensive, and our definition of normal quietly inflated to fill and exceed every gain we made. We earn more, in many cases far more, and we have arranged our lives so that it all goes somewhere. You can't rewind the housing market, but you can look hard at how much of your normal is actually necessary, and how much of it is a standard of living that would have looked lavish to a family that owned their home outright on one paycheck. Number 5. They used cash, and when it was gone, it was gone. Picture a kitchen drawer, or a set of envelopes, or a row of jars on a shelf, one for groceries, one for gas, one for the electric bill, one, if there was anything left, for saving. At the start of the month, the cash got divided up between them. And here was the entire system, in one sentence. When the grocery envelope was empty, grocery shopping was done for the month. There was no overdraft. There was no credit card to quietly cover the gap. The money was physical and finite and visible. And when you could see it getting thin, you slowed down, automatically, without needing any willpower at all. The envelope did the discipline for you. And this connects to something researchers have since confirmed about how our brains work. Handing over physical cash actually hurts a little. There's a small real sting to watching money leave your hand. That sting is useful. It's the thing that makes you pause. And every single payment technology invented since has been designed, deliberately, to remove that sting. Tap, swipe, one click. The whole point is that you don't feel it. Your grandparents felt every dollar leave. We've built a world engineered so we feel nothing at all, right up until the statement arrives. You don't have to go all cash, but try this for 1 month. Take the parts of your spending that always seem to run wild, the eating out, the little extras, and put that money in actual cash, in an actual envelope. When it's empty, you're done. You will be amazed how much slower you spend when you can watch it disappear. Number 6, they knew their neighbors, and that was a financial asset. This one doesn't look like a money habit at all, which is exactly why it's so easy to miss. Half a century ago, people knew the people who lived around them, really knew them. And that web of relationships did an enormous amount of quiet financial work that we now pay strangers to do, or simply go without. You didn't hire a mover, your neighbors and your brothers showed up with a truck and you fed them afterward. You didn't always pay for childcare. The woman next door watched your kids, and you watched hers. You borrowed the latter instead of buying one you'd use twice. When someone was sick, meals appeared on the porch. When someone lost a job, the community closed ranks around them until they were back on their feet. None of that showed up as money, and all of it was worth a fortune. We've replaced almost every strand of that web with a paid service, the moving company, the daycare, the thing you bought because it was easier than asking. Each one is convenient, and each one costs money that a real relationship used to cover for free. And quietly, we become more alone at the same time. You cannot manufacture a neighborhood overnight, but you can treat your relationships as the genuine wealth they are. The friend who's handy, the one who knows cars, the neighbor you could actually knock on the door of. Every one of those connections is money you don't spend and security you can't buy. And rebuilding even one of them is worth more than most things you could purchase instead. Number 7. They bought quality once and kept it for decades. Open a closet in a house half a century ago and you'd find fewer clothes, but you'd find clothes that lasted. A good wool coat that a person wore for 15 years. Furniture built from real wood that got handed down to the next generation. Kitchen tools that outlived the people who bought them. Things were more expensive relative to income, so people bought fewer of them and they bought them to last, and then they took care of them. A pair of good shoes was resold, not replaced. It was a completely different relationship with objects. You owned a smaller number of better things for a very long time. Now we've been sold the opposite, and we've been sold it so well we think it's normal. Cheap, plentiful, disposable. A closet stuffed with clothing worn once or twice. Furniture that sags in a year and gets left on the curb during the next move. We buy far more often, and we somehow end up with less to show for it. Here's the math your grandparents understood in their bones. A cheap thing you replace over and over is almost always more expensive than the good thing you buy once. The $40 boots you rebuy every winter cost far more across 10 years than the well-made pair that lasts the decade. The cheap option is very often the expensive option wearing a lower price tag. Buy them better, then keep them. It's one of the oldest financial ideas there is, and we paved right over it. Number 8. They treated debt as something close to shameful. This one's a genuine mixed bag, so I want to give you both sides honestly. Half a century ago, owing money was not something you talked about lightly. Outside of a home loan, and maybe a car, debt carried a real social weight. To borrow money to fund your lifestyle, to buy things you couldn't afford, to keep up an appearance, was seen as something close to a personal failing. People saved up for what they wanted, and they felt a quiet pride in owing no one. Now, we can overstate this. Some of that old attitude was harsh, and it kept people from borrowing for genuinely good reasons. Debt, used carefully, can be a real tool for a home, for an education that pays off, for a business. I'm not going to tell you all debt is evil, because that's not true. But look at what happened when we swung all the way to the other side. We didn't just make debt acceptable. We made it the default. The invisible background hum of ordinary life. The car comes with a payment. The furniture comes in installments. The phone, the vacation, the coffee, all available now in easy monthly pieces, and we've been trained so completely that we no longer even ask what a thing costs. We ask what the monthly payment is. And those are two entirely different questions. Here's the whole trick in one sentence. The monthly payment is the costume the real price wears. A car doesn't cost $400 a month. It costs $35,000 plus years of your freedom, and the payment is just the disguise that lets you say yes without flinching. Your grandparents saw the whole price, felt the weight of it, and mostly refused to carry it. We've been taught to look only at the payment and to carry debt our entire lives and call it normal. Number 9. They planned to work for one company for life, and it came with a pension. There was a bargain half a century ago that has almost entirely vanished, and its disappearance quietly rewired everyone's finances. The deal was roughly this. You gave a company your loyalty, decades of it, sometimes an entire career. And in return, the company gave you security, a steady job you could count on, and at the end of it, a pension, a guaranteed income for the rest of your life that you did not have to manage or invest or worry about outliving. You worked, they promised, and the promise held. That world is mostly gone, and here's the enormous thing that happened when it went. The entire job of funding your retirement got quietly transferred from the company onto you. The pension became a savings account with your name on it that you are responsible for filling and investing and not outliving. A risk that used to sit on a giant institution now sits on a single household, yours. And nobody sat you down and explained that the rules had changed. A whole generation is expected to do, alone and often unprepared, what used to be handled for them by an employer who promised to take care of it. So here's what you have to take from this one, because it isn't optional anymore. Nobody is coming with a pension. The responsibility is yours now, whether that's fair or not. Which means the single most important financial habit of the modern era is the one your grandparents never even had to think about. You have to pay your own future self, automatically every month, into investments you never touch, because the company that used to do it for you simply doesn't exist anymore. Number 10, they understood the difference between looking rich and being rich. This is the deepest one, and it's the thread that ties every other habit together. Half a century ago, and this was far from universal, but it was common, there was a real cultural suspicion of flashiness, of living beyond your means to impress people. The person quietly regarded as well off was often the one who didn't look it. The paid-off house, the modest car kept for 15 years, the savings nobody ever saw. Showing off wealth you didn't have was considered a little vulgar. Actual security was the status symbol, and most of it was invisible. Now flip on your phone, the entire machine you hold in your hand is engineered to do one thing to your finances, make you compare your real life to a highlight reel of everyone else's performed one. And crucially, most of what you're looking at is not wealth. It's the appearance of wealth, very often financed, very often hollow. The car is leased, the lifestyle is on credit, The person you envy may be closer to the edge than you are. We have built a culture that relentlessly rewards looking rich, which is one of the most reliable ways there is to never actually become rich, because every dollar spent looking wealthy is a dollar that can't be used to quietly become wealthy. Your grandparents, at their best, understood a truth we've been carefully trained to forget. The goal was never to look like you have money. The goal was to have it sitting there, unseen, doing nothing but keeping you free. Now, before we add all this up, let me be fair, because I've spent 20-odd minutes making the past sound wiser than the present, and it wasn't all better. Plenty about the financial world back then was worse. Credit was often flatly denied to women, and to entire communities, on the basis of who they were rather than whether they'd repay. If your one job disappeared or that pension-promising company collapsed, you could be left with very little and few options. The safety nets we take for granted were thinner or missing entirely. And that one-income household often depended on a second person doing an enormous amount of unpaid work with very few choices of her own. So this is not a fantasy about going back. There is nothing to go back to, and much of what's changed, we should be grateful changed. The point is narrower and more useful. Somewhere in the rush forward, and a lot of it was genuine progress, we quietly threw out a set of habits that had nothing to do with the injustices, and everything to do with staying free. The waiting, the fixing, the friction, the knowing what enough was. Those were never the problem, and we can pick them back up today without any of the baggage. Let me show you what that's actually worth. Meet Chris and Dana. A normal couple, 2 kids, a normal house in a normal suburb, a solidly ordinary income. They are not going to churn their own butter or give up the internet. But they got tired of running hard and never feeling like they were getting anywhere, and one weekend they sat down and asked a simple question. What did our grandparents do that we've stopped doing? So they brought a few of the old habits back. They rebuilt some friction. They took their card off every website and unlinked the one-tap payments, and the impulse buying, the stuff that used to just appear on the doorstep, quietly dried up. Call it $85 a month that simply stopped leaking. They killed the modern version of anti-layaway. No more buy now, pay later. No more financing small things. If they couldn't buy it outright, they waited, the old-fashioned way, and the fees and interest that came with all that borrowing went to zero. They looked hard at their normal. They realized they had quietly built a life that a single-income family from their grandparents' era would have found lavish, and they let some of it go. They dropped the second car they barely used and shared one for a while. That alone, all in, was over $400 a month. They went to cash for the wild categories, the eating out, the little extras, and watched their spending slow down the instant they could see it disappearing. And then they did the one modern thing their grandparents never had to. Knowing full well that no pension was coming to save them, they took every dollar those old habits freed up, around $720 a month, and set up an automatic transfer the day after payday into a plain low-cost index fund. And then they did the hardest old-fashioned thing of all. They left it alone. Here's what that becomes. $720 a month at a 7% average return grows to about $125,000 in 10 years. Left alone for 25, it's nearly $600K. Over a 30-year working life, it's close to $900K. Almost $1 million. Not from a raise, not from a windfall. From a completely ordinary family that simply picked up a few habits their grandparents would have considered nothing more than common sense. So here's what I want you to do this week. Pick just 2 of these 10. Not all of them. You'll burn out. And that's the modern way to fail. Just 2. I'd start with rebuilding friction because it's the easiest and it works immediately, and paying your future self automatically because it's the one that's no longer optional. Take the card off the websites tonight, set up the automatic transfer even if it's small, tomorrow. That's it. That's the whole assignment. Because remember that little book in the drawer, the passbook with every dollar written by hand that made you walk into a building and wait in a line just to touch your own money? It looks to us almost comically slow, primitive even. But that little book knew something we've spent 50 years and a great deal of money forgetting. That the pause between wanting something and buying it isn't an inconvenience to be engineered away. It's where all the money was hiding the whole time.